without knowing. Just throw the peace on, tell them good vibes only, yeah. They were hating, but we didn't even notice, cause we're on them good vibes only, yeah.
Greetings and welcome to my channel, Vibe Talks. I'm your guide, Jesse Johnson, as I'm here to guide and even expand your soul with lessons of enlightenment and learning. Today we're going to wind up exploring the 7-year cycle of consciousness. First, let me ask you a question, something that you could basically answer within yourself. Do you believe that we're influenced by not only the cycles, but that we're influenced even by planetary alignments within these cycles? I mean, I'm sure that many of you haven't put much thought into it, or you don't even believe it altogether. And perhaps thinking that everything in our lives and growth and even situations that they just happen randomly. And I'm sure for those that do believe that cycles do occur or that they're influenced by planetary alignments, that somehow they're not really sure how it works. Well, this lesson will wind up putting a lot of things in context for you, and something that you may be aware of but don't quite understand the rhythm that we wind up naturally flowing to. Understand this: things from within us and even outside of us, they wind up flowing within cycles, meaning how we wind up changing and how we wind up evolving within, which could be a progression or even a constriction. And it really depends on us and whether we wish to expand ourselves or stay complacent within our beliefs or even what we believe for ourselves. You see, cycles also take place outside of ourselves, such as events that wind up happening around the world and even in the reality that we wind up journeying through. The evolution of humans, for example, has gone through a sequence of cycles, which I have lectured in a couple of years back, but I will wind up leaving a link to that video on the comment section of this video. So if you wish to check it out and see for yourself, it'll be right there for you. Everything within and even outside of ourselves, they wind up moving in cycles. They wind up moving in patterns and even rhythms that no matter whether one is aware or not, it's something that we wind up naturally flowing through. We either progress or we go into a cycle of constriction, which is basically a choice that we all decide for ourselves. And it is within the accordance of the universal law of free will. So, before we wind up diving further into what this all means, let's first go into history of these two great minds within our history who had winded up developing these concepts of these cycles within humanity to wind up further understanding the rhythm to which we wind up flowing through in our own personal journey. We have all heard of the names of Plato and Socrates, right? They were great philosophers of the past, and they wound up expanding the minds of humanity. Yet, have you any of you have heard of Ptolemy? You see, Claudius Ptolemy was an Alexandrian who was a mathematician, he was an astronomer, and he was an astrologer. And like Plato, Ptolemy was certainly a man before his time when he ended up living in Alexandria, Egypt in 85 and 165 CE. You see, Ptolemy had winded up believing that everything that existed is connected to everything else, and it is ultimately linked to the rotation of planets within our solar system. He was not at all wrong in his philosophy and understanding that how things wind up within us and even outside of us, they want and how they all operated and how they all wind up flowing within the rhythm. You see, even Rudolf Steiner, who was a 20th century Austrian, he was a spiritualist and he winded up doing studies and how he studied individuals and how they winded up growing in spiritually. You see, he felt connected to Ptolemy's understanding when looking into his work, and it was Steiner who perfected the 7-year cycle of our consciousness and how it coincides with the planetary movement within the time of our birth. You see, personally, for myself, I had spent years studying astrology before it even became popular as it is today. And I knew that studying Ptolemy and Steiner's work, that these two great minds had seen cycles of every human soul that I had always knew existed. the very cycles that naturally adheres and flow to the rhythm of the universe in our journey in this reality. To many, understand to fully understand our own consciousness and how we wind up ascending or descending, you must understand the process and how it all flows. And this is why in this lesson that we're going to wind up focusing our attention to how one of these many cycles that we follow, which is the cycle of the 7 year cycle of the consciousness. The cycles that we wind up experiencing through naturally, that winds up changing every 7 years. And when it does, we wind up finding aspects of our everyday existence altered. And with this lesson, and instead of feeling these changes within you, here you'll wind up understanding how these changes, how they're all working, and what to expect in your next cycle. You may or may not notice that the way that we wind up relating in the world around us, it winds up shifting when one cycle comes to an end and when another begins. A deeper understanding happens when you, for example, look into numerology and how the number codes within our name or even our birthday can become like a guided aspect to further direct us in our journey through this life, where we wind up entering one numerological phase to exit another within our personal year number, for example. Understand this: as we wind up living within the laws of duality, that winds up shifting from negative to positive. It's up to us into what direction that we may take in our journey. The things that that we once held dear may no longer matter, and as we wind up moving forward in our own defined purpose, or even move backwards within our own not awakened state, even if one is asleep and not aware, that we wind up shifting through cycles anyways, as it all occurs naturally. So the understanding of this winds up applying to everyone, which can help you flow easier, following the timely rhythm of the universe. We have many cycles, and within these cycles, it's the way that the universe winds up moving within our lives and how we may flow it with it. It's best to understand that these cycles move in like a spiral type pattern, and that the universe is not as random as we think. It's actually very much in order, and it depends on the choices that we make in the universe, as the universe already has a plan within the changes and sequence of events based on the number of choices that we wind up making. Events and changes within us and even outside of us, that no matter what we choose, there is always a plan in place based upon whatever we choose. And like a clock, where humans wind up evolving through the 12 aspects of the zodiac constellations, from like the age of Leo, which happened at the tail end of the Ice Age, to the Aquarian Age, where it's, where we were entered it as of like December 21st of 2012. Everything in the universe is like a dial, and how we wind up evolving as a collective consciousness and as a species altogether, and how we wind up expanding or digressing within our own consciousness. It all flows within the sequence of patterns. Once we understand this, we not only understand ourselves in the most in-depth way, but we also understand the reality around us. And this winds up giving us the advantage to wind up flowing within the rhythm of these cycles and patterns rather than swimming against the currents. And trust me, that is not fun. I've done it a few times myself. The 7 year cycle of our own consciousness is a fundamental way for us to wind up identifying ourselves in our expansion or digression and within ourselves. It comprises of the way that in which we judge the world, and how we determine our values, and how we discover our attractions or even our distractions. It can also be the key to finding our purpose and why we're even here on this planet, why we're even here in this dimensional reality that we winded up incarnating into, or even our role in this life. From the time of our birth, our brain winds up growing, It winds up pruning itself to home in on the experiences that we ultimately serve in our destiny and to wind up shaping our life. The first 7 year cycle, as you will see, is definitely the pivotal moment because it winds up setting the foundation for our identity and our consciousness and how we wind up emerging from this life cycle. It also affects so much of our future. This is the one reason that certain kriyas, which are techniques which help cleanse our body, and meditations that wind up helping us to be able to expand our consciousness, it's because they wind up resetting us and they possess the capacity to wind up freeing us from the constraints that we are often established within the very first 7 year cycle. So let's start with the first 7 year cycle, which happens from the time that we're born to 7 years old. And it winds up that this first year cycle that we experience is very much physical, it's very much emotional, and it is within our social development. It's ruled by the moon, in which we know is basically heavily developed by our immediate environment. That's why that it's ruled by the moon. We come into this life without any kind of knowledge in the world around us, and it's basically a state of innocence. As the moon winds up bringing light to a dark night, with this period, it provides our first view of life. And sometimes the light is bright, and at other times in people's lives, it's dim, like the moonlight during the moon's various phases. For example, we all know that children today are exposed to some form of electronic illumination. It's basically unprecedented in any history. So, an example would be like my daughter when she was a toddler. And to my amazement, as well as to my concern, she was able to operate a smartphone better than I could. And we're all taught that the moon, as a reflection of the sun, is a source of possible illusion, meaning that we're influenced by our parents and their belief systems and those close to our lives and how they perceive how life works rather than the truth and how life actually operates. The main goal of our first 7 year cycle is to wind up grounding ourselves. And this life cycle is dominated by the earth chakra. And during this chakra life cycle, we wind up beginning to explore the world around us using our five senses. Our immune system is activated, and we wind up beginning to form our energetic shell, which we all know as the aura. Our experience during this first 7 years becomes basically the foundation of our future life that we wind up wanting to build. This is why, like childhood trauma that people wind up experiencing at this phase, it must be healed. It's like sealing the cracks to our foundation that was built faulty to begin with. We have to endure the healing process. And sometimes we wind up later doing this in our life cycles. Within the spiritual community, when one becomes awakened and aware, we often take a few trips through what we call the dark night journey. And oftentimes we wind up visiting our childhood experiences so we can heal our inner child who may have been wounded by other people. It often winds up becoming like a process in which we all wind up having to go through to wind up to heal, to release, in order to further raise our vibration and to expand our consciousness. And in order to do this, we have to fortify our foundation that had been weakened due to past experiences. And in order to do this, we have to go back to be able to strengthen that foundation of this phase and to be able to build even further from it through healing, through forgiveness, and through release. It's to learn from our experiences, to wind up building an understanding so we can in turn help others in their struggle within their personal experiences. Is it easy? No, not by far. For some, it's more of a grueling process than it is for others, which is why it's a process that many people avoid. Is it necessary? Yes. So let's start the second stage. Second stage is ruled by Mercury and is from ages 7 to 14. Do you remember the second stage? Do you remember when you were 7, in between the age 7 or 14? This stage, or rather cycle of our consciousness, is, like I said, ruled by Mercury, and it traditionally winds up ruling like the mental state of our mind. It's also a planet that rules our intellectual pursuits and even how we wind up communicating. It's where we wind up bargaining, and oftentimes we wind up getting into a bit of mischief. I'm sure we all remember those days. This phase winds up including when we went to school, when we were making friends. It's also in this phase that where puberty was experienced and where we had oftentimes became social creatures. It was during this stage that I wound up discovering my obsession with metaphysics. And during it, before it even became popular today, I was a bit of a certified nerd with many trips to the library, finding whatever literature that I could find on the subject, which at that time there wasn't very many at all, not like it is now. This particular period is one of the most important in our lives because it often winds up creating some of the most powerful impressions that makes us who we are for the rest of our days, whether that is positive or negative. Our second 7-year cycle is guided by our sacral chakra, which is located in the pelvic region. For those that don't know the 7 chakra systems, we wind up identifying ourselves by our gender roles, and we wind up going through the process that we all know too well, which is puberty. And for many of us, it was a very confusing time in our life. During this life cycle, we wind up being eager to wind up learning new things. Some are even active in sports, and others become in tune with other creative pursuits. It's where we wind up exploring the world outside of our family. And this is also the time where our imagination and feeling takes center stage, where we wind up focusing our attention on our interests and where we either expand on it or we release it by time we wind up entering the next stage of our ever so evolving consciousness. It's a time where we wind up beginning to manifest the things within our own reality, whether that's positive or negative. And being that our imagination and emotions becomes much of the dominant experience in this stage, is how we wind up beginning to manifest things in our life is at this stage. So allow me to tell you a story and how powerful this stage is for many. Okay, you ready? In the story, there was this boy who wanted more than anything this particular BMX red bike. It was the most popular bike at the time. And oftentimes he went to the store with his parents and he would wind up visiting the department of where in the store where this BMX bike was displayed. He even went as far as cutting out the picture in the ads that advertised the bike, where he winded up taping it to the wall by his bed. And oftentimes imagining himself riding this bike and with his friends in the neighborhood. He would do chores around the house trying to save for this bike, and even though he knew it would take a considerable amount of time to buy this bike for himself, that didn't deter him at all. He kept dreaming, he kept imagining, and being excited whenever he saw this bike at the store. So a year had passed when it became his birthday, when it rolled around, and with no real expectation of what he would wind up receiving as far as gifts from his family. It was then that his grandfather told him to come outside with him. It was there that he had seen the very red BMX bike that he had been imagining and focusing on for at least a good year or so. It was his grandfather that looked at him and said, "You have been working so hard to save for this bike, and even mowing my lawn and cleaning my garage with no complaints whatsoever. I seen this bike in the store, and it was the only one that they had left. I wanted to get it for you. Happy birthday." Being that this little boy He was saving for it, but he didn't know how it was going to happen. In his mind, he was going to earn that money, even if it took over a year to earn it, to get the money for this bike. Being that our imagination and our emotions are so raw at the cycle, it's where we wind up learning within our conscious growth how to manifest things in our reality. It's two of the most key ingredients to manifestations that as we get older, we may wind up losing this through our conditioning and our life experiences. Our fears can also play a role in manifesting things through our emotions and imagining the worst case scenario. And then we wind up finding that those things that we winded up fearing and getting upset about, it winds up being the very thing that winds up manifesting in our reality. Just understand that at this stage of growing within our consciousness, it is the stage that we wind up learning, or rather being aware of our ability to where we first begin to learn manifestations. So let's begin during the third stage. Now, the third stage is from ages 14 through 21. And in this stage, it's ruled by the planet Venus. It's during this third chakra life cycle where we wind up believing that we're ready to change the world. Our solar plexus is our third chakra. It's where it's basically located in the stomach region. It is basically the chakra that is the leader, and thus it becomes the leader during this life cycle. We wind up trying to find our place and where we wind up belonging, and where we wind up trying to join different social groups. It's also the time where we wind up learning the rules of society and how it plays, and we wind up practicing with it. It's where we really start to do experimentations at this age. The planet Venus winds up dealing with the concepts of beauty, where we wind up focusing on our outside appearance and the different popular trends. It's where we wind up developing certain ethics in one's own worldview. In many ways, this is where one of the most formative of all stages, because it winds up setting us up for whatever comes next in the world that we live in. It's this period that aids us with our senses of reality, and it may imprint how we wind up reviewing our chosen partners that we wind up marrying or being with, as well as our friends, our relatives, and even ourselves throughout our life. It's very vital that we wind up having a positive self-image that is nurtured during this period. And as a result, it can linger for decades if we don't actively seek these changes to be able to have confidence within ourselves. At this stage, if we wind up malnourishing our own image and what we feel about ourselves, it will affect us for the rest of our life from that point forth, unless we learn to heal that part of ourselves and get that confidence back within ourselves. It's also the stage where some of the most deeply connected ego self is, and how we look and how we're looking to the differences of who we are versus other people around us. And it's this that can basically define us and who we will become if unchecked. So what about the fourth stage? The fourth stage is ruled by the sun, and it goes from the ages 22 to 41. It's the fourth stage in which the sun, and it's also considered the crisis stage of our conscious development. Why the conscious state? Hold on to your seats. This will all start to make sense to you. You see, after we wind up turning 21, and until we wind up turning the age of 28, we wind up entering the real world of an adult. And it's also it's the chakra that's led in this life cycle is our heart chakra. The main goal of this cycle is to basically learn how to refine and effectively invest our own emotions in order to get back the best possible results. This is the time where we start to build our own nest away from our parents and finding a way to independently support ourselves or even perhaps start a family. Some individuals have already left home and started their own life. And for me, I've already left home as of age 17. So some people wind up staying with their parents even past this stage, but most wind up leaving home. You see, our solar stage, it winds up allowing us to exert our power and sparkle in the world of adults. Whatever that may mean to you or me, we have all the rights and the benefits of being a full grown adult, and often without the experience and wisdom to know what to do with it. Some will wind up using this period to to gently, perceive war, or they wind up, figuring out the surroundings and nurturing or even growing a lush garden for all to enjoy. Others, they may wind up scorching the planet with intense heat and a lack of consciousness for other people. It's important to wind up remembering that for all of us, the sun winds up giving life, but it can also destroy others and even themselves. It's up to us to do something positive with that power that we wind up harnessing at this stage. If we don't help others, we become lost. Personal and spiritual growth is often part of the stage, but sometimes it becomes a stage where we wind up adapting to a more egocentric part of ourselves and within our personality. In this stage, we can wind up experiencing our Saturn return. What's a Saturn return? Well, the Saturn return is where we wind up becoming face to face with our own blocks and be forced to push through them. It's where we wind up traveling with what is known as the dark night journey, where all the mistakes and the past things that we held on to and what we have done, they wind up coming to light in this stage and they become crystallized. We feel everything in our past and it winds up bothering us more than usual. Rather than repeating them, we on autopilot, we have the choice to wind up learning from them and wind up turning lemons into lemonade. For me, in this stage, it was where I started my own YouTube channel, Vibe Talks. The point is, if we wind up refusing to heed those lessons that we have previously learned through our experiences or ones within this stage, Saturn will wind up being that drill sergeant, and he'll wind up doing that drill sergeant style smackdown on you. It's like Saturn's return it will start to start off as feeling like a bit of a boot camp for a lot of people. This is also the astrological period of life when that planet Saturn winds up completing its orbit around the sun, coinciding with the time of our birth. It happens every 29.5 years. So if you winded up skating by in your late 20s, this period could come around for you in your late 50s, which won't be half as bad as the first return. So it's now the time that you need to become prepared and not scared. We often feel like the rumblings of this orbital transition a few years before it begins prior to the big 3-0, where careers will really wind up taking off or they will completely flop. We will wind up meeting the love of our life or bolt from the partner that we thought we would be have our happily ever after with. Believe it or not, in the beginning of this cycle, you no longer owe anything to your genetic relatives. Likewise, they owe nothing to you either, especially if you're the one feeling that you're being forced to do something that you intuitively know is wrong. And there is some situations where that happens. The main theme of this cycle is to find your own way of moral judgment and conscience. It is the time to search for a life partner and to start building a family if that happens to be the right time for you. At this stage, you should have basically acquired like an emotional intelligence so that later in life you wind up becoming resilient to any kind of stress that you'll know how to react to any challenging situation. The pressure can feel like a bit overwhelming. And if you're in it right now, just take a deep breath because your so-called quarter life crisis it could just be part of growing up and experiencing growing pains. Although the growing pains can be difficult, if you navigate if you navigate through this fierce storm wisely, you can come out definitely stronger, braver, and happier than you ever thought possible. For those that are at the age of 28, take my advice. At this stage, this is where you're meant to look at every meaning in life, experience, observe, and learn. Here we are at the fifth stage. The fifth stage of our consciousness development is for basically the ages of 41 to 55. And well, this is at the stage where I'm at, not that I'm trying to age myself. This stage is basically governed by the throat chakra, and it's also governed by the planet Mars. And if you don't understand what the fifth chakra is, it's where the throat chakra is, and it's responsible for our creativity and our willpower. It's where we wind up, where we're free to exercise our creativity by our free will. And as long as we stay within the limits of our mission given to us and what we have chosen for ourselves before we winded up incarnating in this reality by our higher self. This is where at the time where we wind up establishing a true communication channel with our own spirit or to clear away any distortions, if any, within our experience. For Mars, it means action and is best exemplified by doing something positive in the world. And during this cycle, we should be as active as possible and fight for those things that we believe in. Unfortunately, for some, along with this stage, we come to the realization that we have not found the light that we thought we'd find, and that things are not quite going precisely as expected. And this is generally when the midlife crisis occurs. It's where men and women wind up finding themselves wondering if that's all there is, and turning to physical pleasures into a goal, or buying new fast goals, or buying new fast cars, and having affairs, or whatever else, seemingly to wind up smoothing out the red hot Martian energy within them. This is also for many the time of cycle where many wind up having divorces during this stage, mainly because the reasons for such personal dissatisfaction are rarely searched for internally, and especially when it's easier to project our woes into the outside world. It's during these years that we should try to and establish ourselves in a new ideology directed toward fulfilling our full potential. It is in these years that we have to reveal our true role and that we're playing together with our higher self. If you are still obsessed with the material things without exercising your creativity, then there is a great chance for you to just wind up stumbling upon your problems in your social, professional embodiment as the life of your physical embodiment. This is the cycle when you need to find and establish your own unique way of communication with your higher self and to live under the guidance of your own intuition. The end of this cycle is basically the exam that winds up ending your spiritual childhood. Here we are at the sixth cycle of our consciousness. where it's within the ages of 55 to 67, where it's ruled by the planet Jupiter and is considered our inner philosopher that's basically born within this stage. It's where we wind up beginning to look for the meaning of everything. It's where we need to walk the walk, where we cannot just talk the talk anymore. It's the final battle between the wisdom of the heart and the wisdom of logic. Yet, with Jupiter comes the ability to wind up sitting back and look over one's life objectively and hopefully with no regrets. Jupiter as a planet is a natural ruler and assumes wisdom and understanding of the way that things work. The planet itself is often known as the guru, knowing it's being the teacher and the giver and a hope for all. It's during the Jupiter stage that we can find the mastery of those pursuits that we've been working all our lives. And once mastery is attained, and realization of one's mortality hopefully leads to the desire and imperative to wind up teaching others. In best circumstances, Jupiter's stage winds up revealing like a realization of responsibility that we have those in the other generations that will surely follow. We can either complain about the following generations or we adhere to our duty to be benevolent, expansive, and wind up passing along our knowledge to those that come after. This can be highly spiritual time in our lives. It's also where the second Saturn returns and may return within our lifetime space, as I had mentioned of its possibility. By age 58, Saturn has completed another 29-year cycle around the sun, and you get your second Saturn return experience, where this can either be rather a challenging period, requiring big changes in work, relationships, or other areas in life. The second return is typically less traumatic than the first one, as we wind up revisiting themes from the first Saturn return. And now that we had the wisdom and the experience of the past 29 years to draw on, we're more likely to have a much greater clarity about who we are and what we want to accomplish. On the second Saturn return, people often wind up feeling like they're finally free to do whatever they want, no longer trying to please or prove themselves to others. Retirement is definitely common, basically a common theme around the second return, and freeing up the time to wind up pursuing one's hobbies or even creative passions. Some even start a new career path altogether, and some even starting a new business for themselves. Many people still feel quite youthful at age 58, and as the second Saturn makes its initiation in the role of elder, this could mean taking a more active role in your community or some sort of mentoring or even teaching the younger generations, as they definitely could surely use the wisdom. Here we are in the last evolutionary cycle of our consciousness, which consists of the age of 67 and on. This is where Saturn is within the planet, within the chronological time period, and in this stage. The Saturn, it's when we wind up realizing that our existence and our true self knowledge, or for some, a lack of it. Youth winds up giving way to maturity, and eventually we wind up moving to a more joyful experience that can only be completely appreciated through the wisdom that comes from decades spent on this planet. For some, the Saturn stage creates a influential and enduring presence that should be embraced by society, but unfortunately it has been neglected in this country that we wind up residing in some other areas as well. For others, this can be a time of bitterness and regret. And within the memories of those in their Saturn stage, it is most certainly a living history. They're most certainly a walking living history in this planet. It is a time where we have a choice. We can either listen to our ego, where we wind up stop evolving and begin to decay, or we wind up following the voice of our higher self and begin to cooperate with nature through realizing our own creative potential that was given to us since birth. The secret is to embrace the ability of our Saturn stage, which is the reward of life well lived and well loved. To go the flow of evolved consciousness and the rhythm of our flow, to know that we had made a mark in the lives of others around us, and thus an impact in the world. Within the laws of the universe, we have the free choice of our will in how we choose to present to the world and within our own life. And now that you're aware of the 7-year cycle and the rhythm of your flow, how will you flow? How will you evolve? How will you grow and teach others to make an impact in the reality that we all live in? Thank you so much for joining me in this fascinating lesson. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button and to become alerted when any more lessons are uploaded, to be able to enlighten and feed your soul. And until next time, I'm your guide, Jessica Johnson. Samsara.